FCCT, how's it going? Good, good. Good. Hey, a special thanks to everybody who helped us out yesterday with our work day. We are getting really close to winding up all the remodeling stuff for our new tenant that's coming in, and so we'd like to thank everybody who helped out with that. We're going to be in 1 Kings chapter 19 today, in 19 through 21. We're going to be following up on some of the things that we've been saying here about Elijah and Elisha, and we're continuing on with our sermon series on being salt and light. And one of the things that's apparent when you start looking at the idea of being salt and light in the world, this idea of being salt and light in the world is very closely tied into the command that Jesus gives to go out and make disciples of all nations. And the problem that we have is that as we see that, the immediate reaction is, well, this is just one more thing to do, right? It's one more thing to put on the list of things that we need to do as Christians. And so we put, evangelism or discipleship or making disciples, we put that on our list of things to do. And for most of us, it's like at the bottom of the list because it's one of the most uncomfortable things for us to do, isn't it? Like if you think about it, how many of you guys love to go out and do evangelism? Let's see some hands out there. I know that guy does, a couple others. How many of you guys, it's not your favorite thing? It's okay to be honest here, it's not your favorite thing, okay? That's fair. It's hard to talk to people about those things, and kind of the view that we generally take of evangelism is, I got to go out and I got to share the Romans road or whatever it is, the way that you were taught to share the gospel message, and the people will think I'm weird and I won't know what to say, and they'll ask me a question that I don't know the answer to, and it's going to be awkward and uncomfortable. And so the thing is that for us it becomes that thing that we just don't do. But the problem is that we've been talking about having an abundant life. And we've been talking about the fact that an abundant life is salt and light in the world. And what we'll see here is that there's a direct connection between making disciples and having an abundant life. Like the thing is that if we say to ourselves, well, I don't want to do this part of the Christian life, we're actually separating ourselves from the abundant life that God has for us. And so I was looking this week, I was looking around trying to find some good examples of this, and I found something that really interesting, and it was a video on YouTube that was titled, "My Cable Guy Shot Me Down," or something like that. So basically it was a guy who was an F-14 pilot talking about how his cable guy shot him down. And I was intrigued. I had to find out what this was about. And it's a guy named Admiral or Rear Admiral Mike Manazir, and I think he's retired now, but he was very high ranking, and he was an F-14 fighter pilot. And just after he had become a fighter pilot, he was at his house and the cable went out, and this was back in the day of the big old TVs, you guys know what I'm talking about, with the glass that was like 5 inches thick on the front. And so he had this big, it was a big TV, it was 25 inches. Yeah, you guys remember the days when 25 inches, you're like, whoo, that's a 25-inch TV, that's amazing. So it was back in those days, and so he had this 25-inch TV, and the cable guy came to fix his TV, and as he tells it, he had this "I love me" wall in his living room. He said his wife allowed him to have the "I love me" wall. And it was basically, that's what he called it. It was pictures of all of the things that he had been doing as an F-14 fighter pilot. And he said just as the cable guy was leaving, he looked back at the wall and he said, "Do you think I could do that?" And his response was, "Well, yeah, of course you could." And so he basically said, you need to have, if you wanted to get in and do this, you could, you're not going to go to like the Naval Academy probably at this point in your life, but, if you have a 4-year college degree, you can go down and this is what you asked for, and these are the things that you need to do, and didn't think anything else of it. Until a year later, when he got a message from a guy who was a lieutenant in the Air Force, flying F-16s, saying, "Hey, do you remember me? I'm your cable guy." So this guy had left in his cable truck, didn't go back home, didn't do anything, went straight to the recruiter's office and found that they didn't have any openings for naval aviation, and so he went next door to the Air Force, and they took him, and he got into this program to become an Air Force aviator and an Air Force pilot, and that's what he did. And so, he was a second lieutenant, and he was doing great in this program. And then he went on to go and fly for airlines, and so he started flying in the reserve, started flying F-15s. And there was a time when this guy, this Mike Manzier, the Rear Admiral that originally was the inspiration for the cable guy to get his pilot's license, and the cable guy, by the way, his name's Reagan Nickel. So Mike Manzier was going to do some exercises off of Key West in Florida, and he started telling the story about, hey, I think this cable guy that I ended up getting into the Air Force is stationed down here in Florida. And so a friend of his says, man, we got to make something happen. And so they arranged a fight between this guy and his F-15 was coming down out of Miami, and he would head north in his F-14 out of Key West, and they arranged to have a dogfight. And he said he went into it thinking, I'm going to get this guy. I'm going to this is my cable guy. What's he going to do? And went into it going too hard, going too fast, going too aggressive, and he ended up getting shot down by his cable guy. Now, of course, it wasn't real shoot down. Basically, once the gun sight is on and they have a recorded picture of that, that's considered a kill. And so he was shot down by his cable guy. So they went at it again, and then this time he beat his cable guy. And then the third time, there was the tiebreaker, the big chance for somebody to find out who was the best. And it said that they just went into this really crazy dogfight. And as you're doing this, you're losing energy. And so you're in this kind of spiral down and down and down until finally they were out of energy, they were out of altitude, and they had to stop, and they were out of gas. They had to call it. And so the third was a tie. And so this was as evenly split as it could be. And I thought about, listening to that story, how this is a great example of making a disciple. And what we're going to look at today is that there's a difference, first of all, between discipleship and spectating. And when we understand that difference, it helps us to understand why it's so important to make disciples. The second, we're going to talk about the answer of discipleship. There's a problem contained in this call to make disciples, and the problem that's contained in this is actually the answer is furnished by making a disciple. Thirdly, we're going to talk about the attraction of discipleship. So let's first of all talk about discipleship versus spectating. And as we do that, let's get into our text today in 1 Kings chapter 19. It says, so he departed from there and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen in front of him, and he was with the 12th. Now remember, we're talking about Elijah, and we've talked about how Elijah had faced off against all these prophets of Baal and had succeeded and had killed them all, and then he thought everything was going to be better. But remember, Queen Jezebel had decided that she wasn't going to take that lying down. She was the one who had sponsored all these prophets of Baal, and so she basically put out a hit on Elijah. And Elijah then is fleeing. Even though he was successful in this big showdown that he had, he was fleeing, and he was not doing so hot. He was not happy about this. And so in 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 19, this is God's response to Elijah's problems. Elijah's having some really big problems. Now here's the thing. Imagine that you had just been successful against all the prophets of Baal, and it made no difference at all. Your life was still in danger. You're running away. People want to kill you. There's a hit out on you by the queen, and your life is going poorly. Imagine God saying, oh, by the way, how about doing some evangelism? Would you like that? Oh, by the way, how about going and making a disciple? It would seem weird that God would answer this turmoil that you're in by giving you another task to do. But that's kind of, in effect, what God has done. And so what's happening is Elijah is departing from where he was when God called him to go do this, and he's going and doing it. He departed from there and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen in front of him, and he was with the 12th. So there's 12 yokes here of oxen, and Basically, Elisha's plowing with the last one. He's at the end of the line here. And said Elijah passed by him and cast his cloak on him. Now, you have to understand what this is. I don't think that Elijah goes by and just kind of throws his cloak over the guy's face, and all of a sudden the lights are out. I don't think that that's exactly what is happening here. He's basically kind of putting his cloak on him. And in order to understand that, you have to understand in the ancient world, your cloak was your identity. And you've heard of passing the mantle, and this is really literally what's happening, is he's passing the mantle. He's basically saying, hey, you're the next me. Right? And so he does that, and in verse 20 he says, and he left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, let me kiss my father and my mother, and then I will follow you. And he said to him, go back again, for what have I done to you? He's basically saying to him, look, I'm not forcing anything on you. This is not me commanding you to be my disciple. This is me inviting you to be my disciple. And that's an important distinction. It says in verse 21, he returned from following him and took the yoke of oxen and sacrificed them and boiled their flesh with the yoke of oxen and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he arose and he went after Elijah and assisted him. So basically, he burns his bridge to his old life. By sacrificing this yoke of oxen, he's basically saying that old life that was part of, that's done now. There's no going back from this. And he follows Elijah. And the thing that's interesting about this is in dealing with Elisha's situation of, just being a farmer, he's taken then and put into this dangerous place of being the next Elijah when Elijah's running around scared. Elijah's at his wit's end, and God gives him one more task. But that one more task is exactly what he needed. It's what makes his life full. It's what makes his life complete. And the thing I want to get across to us today is that when God calls us to go and make disciples, God is not giving us just another task. He's giving us the missing piece of our abundant life. He's giving us the part of our life that really solidifies the fact that we can be salt and light in the world. And to understand this, let's talk about discipleship versus spectating. See, a lot of us, when we're spectating, we think we're actually being disciples, but we're not. The problem is that we have in the world is that we find ourselves with a lack of meaning. We find ourselves with a lack of meaning. You see, the problem is that in our modern world, we don't want for anything, really. We have the things that we want. Now, you might have not exactly the particular thing that you want, but you know what I'm saying? The thing is, when you look at people who are considered very poor in our culture versus people who are rich, there really isn't much difference between them except in the scale of things, right? So the thing is, the poor person has a home, the rich person has a home. The poor person has a car, the rich person has a car. Right? The poor person has food, the rich. Now, the thing is that the kind of house you have might change. The kind of food you eat might change. But the thing is that there really isn't, to a large extent, a lot of differences between those things. And you might think, well, yeah, we've reached this place of everybody having their needs met and everybody being great. Haven't you noticed as you walk around the world that everybody is just silly with joy? Haven't you noticed that nobody's angry anymore? Nobody's stressed out. We've reached nirvana. You've recognized this, haven't you? That our world is now as happy as it can possibly be in finding that, our needs are met. In fact, the opposite has happened. And the reason for that is why we have more material things, we don't understand what these things mean anymore. We suffer not from a lack of material provision, but from a lack of meaning and purpose in our lives. Because the ancient world was interesting because they had a lack of material provision, but they didn't have a lack of meaning. Now we're in the opposite place. We have no problem having material possessions, but we have a terrible time finding meaning. In Exodus chapter 12, verse 5 through 11, this is kind of a little bit of a long passage, but it's, I think, important for us to understand what's going on in the world. You remember that Israel was under the tyranny of Egypt. They were enslaved. And God was going to get them out, and God had some instructions for them to get out. And you would think that God would say, okay, here's the plan. We're going to run into the desert. We're going to turn left. You know that weird squiggly tree, when you get to that turn left, run as fast as you can, run in a single file, right? Make sure your tracks are inside the tracks of the person in front of you. They'll only think one person came this way. And we're going to, in the daytime, hide, in the nighttime, run as fast as you would think that those would be God's instructions, right? If I was leading people out of captivity, that's what I'd say. I'd be like, sneak by, because you know what's going to happen is they're going to have that light that searches, and you got to, you know what I'm saying? That's the instructions I'd give, is how do you get by that light? But that's not what God does, and we have to understand why that is. Exodus chapter 12, verse 5, it says, your lamb shall be without blemish. So God starts off saying, this is how you guys are going to get out of here, is you're going to find a lamb and you're going to make sure he's without blemish. Sounds like a good first step, doesn't it? A male, a year old, you may take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of this month. So you got to get this lamb, then you got to keep it for a while. And then when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs at twilight. So at twilight, we're all going to kill our lambs. Now imagine, these are the instructions that are being given to you. Now put yourself in their shoes for a second. Like we're so used to reading this, it doesn't strike us as odd anymore. But put yourself in the shoes of these Israelites. This is how we're getting out of here. You got to find a lamb. Oh, what are we doing with the lamb? Like you start thinking to yourself, we could distract them with the lamb. No, you're not going to distract it. You're going to keep the lamb for 2 weeks. Oh, okay. Oh, that's unexpected, but let's go on. Then what are we going to do? All of us at twilight, we're going to take our lambs. Yes. We're going to throw them in the faces of the Egyptians and distract them. No. We're going to hide behind them and sneak out. No. We're all going to kill the lambs. Wait, what? Can you imagine? Doesn't this sound weird? You shall keep it until the 14th day of the month, when the whole assembly, the congregation of Israel, shall kill their lambs at twilight. Then they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they eat. So now you got to take the blood of this lamb that you've killed, you've got to smear it all over the doorposts. Here's the thing, guys. Does this seem like, if you were listening to this and these were the instructions about how you're getting out of Israel or how you're getting out of Egypt, would you think that this was crazy? You would, wouldn't you? It says in verse 8, they shall eat the flesh that night, roasted on the fire, with unleavened bread and bitter herbs they shall eat it. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roasted, its head with its legs and its inner parts, and you shall let none of it remain until the morning. Anything that remains until the morning you shall burn. In this manner you shall eat it with your belt fastened, your sandals on your feet, your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. These are crazy instructions for getting out of the land that's keeping you in captivity. You have to understand that these things all have meaning. Because when we're in captivity, we think we're suffering from a lack of resources, when in actuality we're suffering from a lack of meaning. And that's true in every one of our lives. We often think that it's a lack of resources that are causing our problems. If only I had this job. If only I could make this investment. If only I can get this car. If only I can get this house. If only I can get things together. If only I can have this. We often think that this is the problem with our life. If only I get this thing. Here's the thing. How many times have you thought that to yourself, and then you get that thing that you think is going to solve your problems, and it doesn't solve your problems? Raise your hand if you've ever been in that position. You think, if I only get this, then my life will be great. And then you get it, and it doesn't change your life. The reason is because that's really not what's wrong with your life. It's not a lack of material provision. It's a lack of meaning. And what God wants to do is He wants to bring meaning into your life. And when He tells you how to do it, you're going to look at Him and you're going to say, I don't get it. And that's what happens when God tells us to go out and make disciples. That's what happens when God tells us to go out and be salt and light. You know, when Elijah is sitting there complaining to God and saying, hey, I just want to die, God says, okay, here's the deal. You're going to go and I'm giving you this list of things to do. And Elijah probably goes, I don't get it. That doesn't make any sense. And it won't make any sense until he obeys. Why? Because there's a difference between discipleship and spectating. There's a difference between disciples. See, most of us have not ever been disciples. We've only been spectators. The thing is that there's a whole bunch of people in Egypt when God gives Israel these instructions. And a lot of them are Egyptians, and they watch the Israelites doing these things, and they go, that's really weird. And they're the ones who stayed behind in Egypt. You see, they weren't disciples of what God said to do. They were spectators of what God said to do. You see, the thing is, we understand this implicitly. You know, how many of you guys have ever gone to see a play? You guys have gone to see a play? How many of you guys, when you were going to see the play, interacted with the people on the stage? You said, hey, I'm your Huckleberry. No? Here's the thing, you understood the difference between being a spectator and being somebody on the stage, didn't you? You see, the people on the stage, they have a script. There's somebody who has authored what's happening on the stage. And that person who has authored what's happening, he's thought of everybody's lines, what they should say, what they should do, because he's trying to convey to the audience something important. He's trying to convey to the audience meaning. And he's doing so by having the actors do and say things that are important. Now here's the thing. Without the author doing that, there is no play and there's nothing to watch. Right? But the second thing that's really important is this. If there's nobody who has the courage to get up on the stage and obey the author, say the things the author says to say, and do the things the author says to do, then there is no performance, is there? You see, there's a huge difference between being in the audience and watching it happen versus being on stage. What's the difference? Obedience. When you're in the audience, you don't have to do any of the things that the person on stage is doing, and you don't have to say any of the things that they're saying. But that makes you a spectator. You see, here's the thing. God has given us His Word. What we're involved in is this play that glorifies God. It's this performance of the glory of God. It shows the whole world God's glory. It shows all creation His manifest wisdom, His limitless mercy. That's what we're involved in. But the problem is a lot of us sit in the audience and we say, I don't find any meaning in what I'm doing. That's because you're not on stage being obedient. That's what it means to be a disciple. A disciple is one who is disciplined, one who is listening to the words, the commands being given them, and doing them. That's what a disciple is. You're obedient to the Word. When the Word tells you to say something, you say it. When the Word tells you not to say it, you don't say it. When the Word tells you to do something, you do it. When it says refrain from doing it, you don't. That's what it means. Now, in the audience, you have greater freedom. On the stage, you have greater meaning. In Matthew chapter 21, verse 28 through 32, it says, "What do you think? A man had 2 sons. And he went to the first one and said, 'Son, go and work in the vineyard today.' And he answered, 'I will not.' But afterward he changed his mind and went. And he went to the other son, and he said the same. And he answered, 'I go, sir,' but he did not go. Which of the 2 did the will of his father?" They said, "The first." Jesus said to them, "Truly I say to you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes go into the kingdom of God before you. For John came to you in the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But the tax collectors and the prostitutes believed him. And even when you saw it, you did not afterward change your minds and believe him." He's basically saying, look, somebody's in the play and they're on the stage and they're performing. They're being disciples. And some people are in the audience and they're not. And he's saying the problem is that it's completely backwards. You religious leaders, you think you're on the stage and you're not. And you think that the sinners are in the audience, and they're not. See, because what's happened is the sinners have repented, have decided to listen and fulfill the Word of God. So therefore, they are actually being disciples. While you guys said you would be disciples, but you're not, actually. What Jesus here is saying is something completely important to us to understand. Just because we think we're disciples doesn't mean that we are. We're disciples when we allow the Word of God to discipline us. There's a difference between delivering the lines that the author of the play has written for you versus idle talk in the audience. What's interesting here is that we see that Elijah has a problem, and that problem is a problem of spiritual depression, and it comes from his lack of purpose. It comes from his lack of meaning. And so God says, this is what you are to do, and in doing it, in listening, Elijah then has his world transformed. There's great weight given to the actions of a play. And that great weight gives us blessing. Have you ever noticed that, when people are acting on a play, they'll say something, simple, but they'll say it with such meaning, such conviction, such passion that it gives it weight? You know what I'm saying? Like, they can say something simple, and it just becomes so important, right? Here's the thing. In your life, is that how you act? Or do you just say things? You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're out in the audience and you're kind of whispering to your friend about something, you're just kind of saying stuff, right? But the person on the stage, what they've done is they've looked at the words that they're given to say, and they've understood the meaning of these words, and they've put not only their actions and their voice into it, but they put their heart and their mind into it as well. You see, that's what God calls to us to do in being disciples. That in living out His Word, we don't just robotically do things, but we give it weight. And the person on stage acts that weight out, and it's rewarding. That's why people get up on stage and do the performances they're doing. Because to give these things weight, to embody these things that have meaning, is rewarding. They want to do it. You see, the thing is that we can see that that's true, and in our lives, can you imagine if you had the honor of doing a play that was written by God Himself? And every one of us is actually called to that. Every one of us is actually given that opportunity. There is great weight given to these actions. In the Passover meal, there was great weight given to these things because these things, God could save Israel without all this. God had the power to save them without, getting a lamb and cooking it and making sure it's all eaten and having bitter herbs and all that kind of stuff. God could have said, hey, hit Jack's in the Box on the way out. Get some, jalapeno poppers. It's good. But He didn't do that. Why? Not because He needed them to do this in order to save them. God is not limited by that. God's saying, look, I am giving you something to act out here. I'm giving you something that carries great weight, so carry it. Now, here's the problem that we encounter, and this is what I want you to understand. This is actually what's caused Elijah's problem. This weight has caused this problem. Let's look back at 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 3 and 4. So remember that I told you the story about what Elijah's been up to, and he's taken on these guys, he's beaten them, and all that kind of stuff. And the problem is that it didn't really matter. In fact, it actually made things worse for him in a sense because the people that were sponsoring these prophets, the king and queen, They weren't too keen on this happening. They weren't great. They weren't so happy about losing their 400, basically their prophets. It says in 1 Kings 19:3, it says, then he was afraid, and he arose, and he ran for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, it is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers. You see, what's happened is that even though he's been triumphant against these prophets, Jezebel, the queen, has put out a hit on his life, and so now he's felt like that he is not being able to carry the weight. You see, what he feels like is Israel is not being appropriately obedient to God. There's a lack of discipleship in Israel, and his part to play is to draw Israel into this discipleship. But it's not working. And he says, I'm no better than my fathers. I've not been any better at this than any of them. I'm a failure. This weight that you've given me, God, is too much. Why don't you just let me die because I'm just a failure here? You see, here it's interesting that the very same thing that causes the joy of having a life of meaning and purpose, which is the weight that's given to our actions, is also the things that causes the spiritual depression that he finds himself in. This is the same thing, right? It's when you get some weight, it's great. It's like this is meaning, it's powerful, it's important. The things that I do in my life actually change things. And then when he's given something that seems too big for him, he's like, I can't handle this. This is too much weight, and he wants to die. What happens is when God calls us to make disciples, we go, God, this is too much for me. I can't do this. I can't make disciples. I'm not that smart. I don't know the Bible that well. I'm not the guy who can answer every question. I'm not the guy who has all the answers and has the charm and has the charisma and has the way of speaking and has the radio voice and all that. I don't have that stuff. So let's look secondly at the answer of discipleship, because interestingly enough, the problem that's created by the call to discipleship is to go and make disciples. The charge to Elijah is to pass the mantle to Elisha. And it just seems like he's causing him more problems, but that's not really true, because in the ancient world they had this understanding that, here's the thing, people are not the problem. Oh, they are the problem usually. I mean, we know this, right? Your life would be perfect if it weren't for everybody else. Let's be honest, right? Right. But people are also the answer. So in Psalm 127, there's this interesting verse. It says, behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. If you've ever been on a plane with a screaming, toddler, you know this is true. Children are a heritage from the Lord. They're a great blessing. Isn't that what you're saying when you're hearing this kid scream? Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies at the gate. See, the thing is that it's known that children are difficult. It's known that children are a problem. In fact, put yourself back in this day and age. Like, these guys were always on the verge of starving to death, right? And so you know what they thought of in their brilliant wisdom? They thought, let's have more mouths to feed, right? Here's the thing that's genius about that, because people are the problem and the solution. Right? The kids are the problem. I have so many mouths to feed. They're also the solution. They go out and they help do work. They help get food for us to eat. That's what you did when you were a kid in this day and age. Is, as you gained enough height and weight and coordination and everything to go out and do, you were given tasks that you were capable of, and you went out and did. Now, I'm not talking about sweatshops and all that kind of stuff. There's a happy medium, let's say. Okay, we don't have to make kids slaves and all that kind of stuff. I'm just saying, as they were ready, they took on work. Why is this the case? Because if you create disciples, you see, here's the thing. Spectators are the problem. Disciples are the solution. Because we said that people are the problem and the solution. You see, the thing is, spectators, if you go out and you create more spectators, you're just creating more problems. But if you go out and you create people who are on stage, people who are disciples, people who are living out the words of God, they are the solution. You see, the funny thing is that a lot of times, as we're saying, I don't want to go out and create disciples, we're actually also complaining at the same time that there's not enough people who agree with us in the world. Have you noticed that? Like, everybody's terrible. Everybody does, nobody does what's right. That's kind of what Elijah was like. Nobody does what's right. Everybody's against you, God, and I'm not good enough to solve this problem. And God says, well, just go find one disciple. Go find one disciple. Go out and find one disciple. And it changes everything. You see, it's interesting that the people are the problem and the solution. Yesterday I talked about our workday. The thing is that why do we have workdays? Because we have people in this building, and as we have people in this building, you all destroy everything. Right? That's just the way that it is. The littlest ones are the worst, right? They're the ones that are just like picking at stuff and pulling things off. And when we had the daycare here, like everything you could tell what was out of the reach of a child, because everything above it was clean and pristine and nice and put together, and everything below it was just terrible, right? The thing is that this is the way that it is. The reason the building needs work is because of you people. You guys are the problem. And you're the solution. See, we had people come yesterday, and all the stuff that accumulates over time. We had people painting sheds, and we had people, fixing blinds, and we had people, working on all kinds of stuff throughout the building. And they were making the building. They were not only taking care of problems that were accumulated from us being in the building, but they were also making the building even better. They were actually making improvements. See, they were the problem and the solution. So let's talk about the attraction of discipleship. What's interesting about the story I told at the beginning was Rear Admiral Mike Manazar. He had this wall of all the things that he was doing and kind of had accomplished in the Air Force. And somebody looked at that and said, "Could I do that?" Becoming a disciple was attractive to that guy. It's interesting that Jesus tells us in Matthew chapter 16, verse 24 through 26, it says, Jesus told his disciples, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul?" You see, what's interesting is that Jesus calls us into discipleship. Jesus calls us to take up a cross. And we answered that call. But what's funny is that you don't think other people would be attracted to that call. You think that other people will see the call of discipleship and they'll say, "Nah, I'm not interested." And a lot of people will. But what's interesting is the actual call of discipleship. Discipleship is attractive to those who start to understand that the problem that they're having in their life is a lack of meaning. When somebody starts to realize that my problem is a lack of meaning and you offer them meaning, they start to understand that that meaning comes with the cross. The cross giving up my life. You see, what happened was, it's interesting. When Elijah calls Elisha, he puts the robe on him. He doesn't tell him, "Okay, now Elisha, you got to take these oxen that you're having, you got to kill them, and you got to give that up, and you got to follow me." He doesn't say that. He goes, "Look, what I'm offering you is to follow me." And it's an offer. You can take it or you can reject it. And that offer is attractive. And Elisha kills those oxen himself, because he wants to be a disciple. We often think that the offer of discipleship is not attractive when it is. You see, when you take up the cross, what's happening is you're putting your old self away and you're putting on a new self. You're putting the old life of having no meaning and all of the freedoms that offered. You're saying, "I understand that those freedoms are meaningless and empty, and that the burden of the cross is what gives my life purpose and meaning now." You're saying to yourself, with a loving heart of mind, soul, and strength, I'm going to put to death the loves that have gotten me into this place, loving things that had nothing to offer me. I'm going to put those to death, and instead I'm going to put on loves that are going to make my life abundant. You're going to seek first God's kingdom. And when you seek first His kingdom, what you're going to find is that as you put His kingdom first, you don't give up everything in the world. You put everything in the world in its proper place, and you get twice the enjoyment out of everything in the world because it's being enjoyed for what it is instead of what it isn't. You see, what we're saying here is that God's call to us, God's call of being a disciple, is what's freed us. The discipline of God's Word has freed us. The discipline of God's Word has made us who we are. It's made our lives abundant. It's made our lives rich. It's sorted out all of our loves. It's made us glorious. And when we offer that to somebody else, it is attractive if we've been disciples ourselves. So what do we believe, belong, and become from this? We believe that becoming and creating disciples is like two sides of the same coin, and that coin is our abundant life. We belong to Christ and others through discipleship. That discipleship, obeying, is better than being a spectator. We become transformed through discipleship and through creating disciples. Elijah's life was changed by doing one more thing that God asked him to do. And our lives will be changed as well.
Thanks for joining our worship service today. Please follow us on our Facebook page where you can let us know about any needs or prayer requests you may have and keep up with the latest church news and events. You can also check out all of our past lessons and other videos by visiting our YouTube channel. At First Christian, we strive to be the presence of Christ in the world by helping others to believe in God's love for them, to belong to His church, and to become like Christ in their lives. If you would like to support us in our ministry, you may do so by giving online through our website at www.fcct.org or by mailing checks to the church. Have a great week.